Thank you for coming today. I'm Martin Eggensberg. I'm the president of Black River Technical College, and I want to thank each and every one of you for coming today to witness the story of our speaker. This is a very auspicious occasion. We have the honor of engaging with a gentleman whose life doesn't only span years, but spans eras. He's walked through the darkest chapter of modern history and emerged not broken, but as a brilliant and defiant light. Today we have the profound privilege of welcoming Mr. Emanuel Mandel, a Holocaust survivor, a tireless educator, and a living testament to both the depth of human cruelty and the astonishing heights of the human spirit. In order to give you a little bit of background about how we managed to get Mr. Mandel here a second time at this college, I will turn the microphone over to Carrie Bannister, who is a senior program coordinator of the Office of Survivor Affairs at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in D.C. She has been at this position, has it been 12 years? 12 years. And again, this is incredibly timely, and this is a very rare opportunity. Please pay attention. We could not offer a more serious and important and impactful guest lecture than this. Thank you for your time. And Carrie, please come to the stage. Round of applause for Carrie.
Such a pleasure for us to be here today. As you heard, my name is Carrie Bannister. I'm the Senior Program Coordinator in the Office of Survivor Affairs at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, which is located in the in the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. And I think the location of the museum shows how important it is to our nation, to our history, and the vital lessons that we can learn from the history of the Holocaust. At the museum, we have approximately 40 Holocaust survivors who volunteer. They volunteer in a number of different capacities, speaking about their Holocaust experience, of course, to groups such as yourselves. But they also volunteer at the museum, orienting our visitors, welcoming them. They provide tours of our permanent exhibition to provide lessons about this history to our visitors. Additionally, we run a writing workshop for Holocaust survivors at the museum. Their testimony, written testimony, is available on the museum's website. All of you can research that and read more about their experiences through short stories. And of course, we have survivors that help us with research and with translation and transcription of the museum's vast collection, which is accessible on the museum's website as well. So for our educators that are here, I encourage you to visit the website to utilize museum resources, including resources that include survivor testimony in your own classroom. The museum defines Holocaust survivors as Jews who experienced the persecution and survived the mass murder that was carried out by the Nazis and their collaborators between 1933 and 1945. This includes those who were in concentration camps, killing centers, ghettos, and prisons, as well as refugees or those who were in hiding. Our definition also includes people who did not necessarily self-identify as Jewish, but were categorized as such by the perpetrators. And as you know, as you've heard, this morning you have the unique opportunity to hear from Mr. Manny Mandel. He'll speak about his Holocaust experiences, and then you'll have the opportunity to ask him some questions. When you came in, you should have received a pen and a note card. If you have questions for Manny, please write them on the note cards, and we'll have staff coming through after his presentation to collect those note cards so that we can address as many questions as possible with the time that we have with Manny today. With that, I would just ask that if you have cell phones with you, that your cell phones are silent, and we ask that you refrain from flash photography during the program. And with that, I would like to formally welcome our featured speaker, Mr. Manny Mandel. Thank you.
You need to know that Hitler comes to power in 1933 in an absolutely legal way. He becomes a chancellor of Germany. the way all chancellors become chancellors. He then changes the job, and of course changes what he does. How does it impact on me, and how does it tell you the history of the Holocaust through my eyes? My first Holocaust experience really could not even be identified as Holocaust because it happens very early. But I'll tell you what the history was. I was raised, not born, I was a few weeks old when I got there, but I was raised in a country in the Central Europe called Hungary. Anybody ever hear of Hungary? Anybody ever hear of Budapest, the capital of Hungary? Anybody been in Budapest? Okay, I understand. My parents are both ethnically Hungarians. My father is from Transylvania. You know one person from Transylvania up there. Who's from Transylvania? Dracula, right? My father told me never that, but that's okay. My mother is from that part of Hungary, which later on became Yugoslavia. My mother tells a story that when she was about 9 or 10 years old, the end of the First World War, 1919 or so, the country of Yugoslavia was created out of the former Austro-Hungary, Hungary. And she described it with one particularly interesting piece of anecdote. She says, the teacher came into the classroom and said, okay, tomorrow or next weekend or whatever, we are going to change language from Hungarian to Serbo-Croatian, which is the language of Yugoslavia. Now, please understand, these are so dissimilar that the alphabet is different. Serbo-Croatian is written what is called Cyrillic, which is the way Russian is written, and Hungarian is written with Latin characters, much as the characters that you usually write. But they adjusted to it. That had little to do with any Holocaust issues, but it did with the rise of the power of the Nazi power in Germany, which does not really become important until a bit later, actually officially, as I said before, 1933. Now the reason I mentioned this to you is because in the winter of 1941, I'm 5.5 years old, I'm a little guy. My parents decided to take a vacation trip from Budapest south by train to my mother's hometown. My grandparents were there, a couple of aunts, a cousin. So this was winter time, around Christmas time, they decided to take a vacation. It seemed like an okay thing to do, we went there. We stayed in, my mother had 2 sisters. I stayed in the house of one of the sisters, and I remember the first day or two we were there, nothing much happened. I don't recall what I did. About the 3rd day, I think on a Friday morning, early in the morning, maybe 7:30 or so, 7:30 or so in the morning, somebody came up the stairs or the elevator, I don't remember, and said, there's something funky going on the street. Within 5 minutes of that announcement, there's a knock on the door, and 2 well-dressed police officers are standing there saying, ladies and gentlemen, we have to come outside, please dress warmly. This is winter, not blizzard time, it's not 60 below zero, but it's winter. So put on gloves and stuff. You have to come outside. We have to run a census. And you know what a census is? We do one here every 10 years. The Nazi government decided that in order to know where everybody is all the time, they would call censuses, that's a plural, sometimes on a 15-minute notice. To have a census on a Friday morning, nowhere seemed very odd, but it didn't seem dangerous, so we did it. We came outside. It's also interesting to me that I thought the police officers were very nice. My father's recollection, you see my father's picture there with me, about the same age, at 6. My father's recollection was that they were rough. We came outside, we were told to line up on the street. And after we all lined up, we were told to turn left and start walking in this direction. I remember very clearly that we walked for a long time. I am 5.5 years old, I'm a little guy. I walked, my father carried me, my mother carried me, I walked. And we arrived to a place which, believe it or not, I recognize. Let me set the scene for you. We're on a sidewalk. On our left is a 7-foot stockade fence. On our right is a major, not a highway, but a major road. And the people lined up heading in this direction. And we noticed that a couple of 100 yards ahead of us, the gate on this stockade fence is open. That's the gate that you use to get trucks in and people in. And I recognize the place because in European cities, maybe some of you have been there, if they're not on the ocean or a lake, they'll make beaches out of rivers. Now the Danube River, which is a big river, flows through the city that I'm describing. And in the summertime, perhaps 3 months before, maybe in August, I was there. In the summertime, and I played in the sand, and the restaurants, and playgrounds, and all kinds of other attractions, a very nice beach area. So I recognized the place. Why we were here, I don't know, because the river is frozen. Why would we be here? I'll tell you about it. In any case, what we're doing is we're lined up here, and we're marching in this direction towards this open gate, and we notice the people make a left turn towards the river, which is about 300 or 400 yards away, and that's what's happening. As we are doing this, there's a police officer on our right who says to my father, "What are you doing here?" My father said, "I'm visiting the family." He said, "Well, that's your business. But I know you're not from here. So if you were to be counted in the census with the people in your group, it would mess up the numbers." He believed this was a census. Step aside. Okay. He may have saved our lives, I'm not sure. We step aside, and within minutes of the stepping aside, the staff car comes down the road, a uniformed person gets out, talks to his comrades, gets on the bullhorn and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, the requirements of the census have been met. Go home." My father grabbed the first taxi he could find, and we went home to my aunt's house. One of the first phone calls we got in the aunt house was the other aunt saying, "We had plans for today, where were you?" So we told her. She said, "Well, at 7:30 in the morning, 2 officers came to my house as well, asked me 3 questions and left. Did not answer them down till then." So the question is, what happened? The boys and girls, all those people who went through the gate and made a left turn towards the river, went to the banks of the river, which had been cracked open, 3 feet of ice, by cannon fire that morning. They were shot into the river, never to be found downstream, or found in March when the river thawed out. So imagine this kind of an experience. Obviously I wasn't part of it, but I know of it. This is something called a pogrom. Anybody ever hear the word pogrom? P-O-G-R-O-M. A senseless, valueless, importance-less exercise that you can do to somebody and he can't stop you. There are many pogroms. This is the only one that I know of personally because I was in the neighborhood. The next morning, my father decided what we need to do is leave and go back to Budapest, which is where we live. Now understand this. We had no family in Budapest, lots of friends. We had family where we were. But somehow when there's a catastrophe of this sort, you want to go home. H-O-M-E is important. And we did. Now that was fun because my father called for a taxi. And there are 2 kinds of taxis available in those days in that city. One kind of taxi had an engine and a wheel, and the other one had a horse and a buggy with bells on them. And as we went to the train station, it was fun for a 5.5-year-old to ride in a sleigh with a horse, and all the bells were ringing. It was very nice. We go back to Budapest, and at this point, there's the very beginning of that which becomes the Holocaust a bit later on. Let me sidestep this just for a moment. You may or may not know, I wish you did, that Hungary's relationship to the Nazi government of Germany was unique. I'm not going to ask you what it is. There were 2 countries in Europe which became allies of the Nazi government. One was Italy, and the other was Hungary. As a consequence, Hungary was ruled by the Hungarian Nazi Party, whose symbol was not the swastika, but a crossed arrows. They were in no way nice, no way good, but it was not a situation whereby we were being deported into that which you've heard about, called concentration camps and the death camps. We're now in 1942. Need to give you a piece of background that makes Hungary is different than the other countries, and so is our life in Hungary, which is pretty good. And I, as a child, had no issues, except a couple, having to do with the Holocaust. Because I wasn't a doctor, a lawyer, an Indian chief, didn't have a job or something. I could not be fired from my teaching position. I could not be fired from the university, which is what was happening. But I was a kid. The first thing that happened to me had to do with the fact that everybody had to wear a yellow star. You may have seen pictures of it. I was a 6-year-old, first grader, walked to school with a yellow star. I thought it was great. Here I am, little guy, and I have the same kind of important mark as all the adults had. I didn't realize it was not that mark of distinction. It was a target. I didn't know that every morning when I went to school, somebody would follow me. An arrangement, my father and some other people would follow me and other kids, just to be sure they got to school. Now understand, please, the school by chance, by coincidence, was 4 blocks from my house. We lived on the 5th floor of the apartment building, top floor, and we could see my school from upstairs. We could see the street, but somebody would follow me, because it didn't happen to me, but it was not unusual to have somebody whack you on the head. They don't want your boots, they don't want your shoes, they don't want your backpack or your coat. Just want to whack you on the head, because this is a target that tells you, that tells them it's okay. Nothing will happen to them if they whack you on the head. That was my first beginning experience with this. As time goes by, other things begin to happen, which a Holocaust begins. Not necessarily, I don't remember the sequence, but one day the man comes to the door and says, "I must take your telephone." And my father and my mother asked why. And the man said, "Look, there's a law been passed that Jews can't have telephones. If somebody can explain that to anybody, I ain't got to do with this, no telephone." Okay. Most middle-class families, and we're a middle-class family, had some household help. There was a young woman from a farm, not from Budapest, who lived in our apartment. She had her own room, her own bathroom, sink, and she helped my mother take care of things. Well, she was told she has to go home, because Jews could not have household help. Well, in those days, guys, there were no washing machines, no refrigerators, no freezers, no microwaves, and none of the conveniences we have today. So my mother had to do that by herself. She survived, but it was difficult. Next, my father would receive a call or a telephone, when we still had one, or a note in the mail, or somebody would come to the door, knock, and say, "Mr. Mandel, on Tuesday at 3 o'clock, let's say, you need to be at this train station, because you're going to be going away to something called labor camp." Hungarian men were in the army. They were fighting the front for the Nazis in the Russian front. So the work that they couldn't do at home had to be done by others. So they organized these labor battalions of Jewish men to go and do some railroad repair, some mining, some agriculture, some road repair in Hungary itself. And for the better part of 2 years, my father was away from home more than he was home. One of the things that happened while he was home is I went to him and I said, "Dad, I'm now about 7 years old, and I have a like-little tricycle. It's time for me to get another one." To which he said, "That's fine, man. I economically buy a bicycle, but I'm not going to do it for 2 reasons. First, we lived on the 5th floor, and our elevator, which was often inoperable, I would have to truck the bicycle down and up, and if I had to, I would do that. He would do that for me. I could not truck a bicycle down 5 flights of stairs or up. But there's a second reason. In Europe, you don't ride your bicycle in your backyard because you have no backyard. But you do have parks. We'd have to go to a park which was near our house, and you'd ride the bicycle. And if you'd be out of my sight for 5 seconds with your yellow star, the same thing would happen. They don't want you bike, they don't want anything. They want to whack you in the head. For that reason, the bicycle. I was very disappointed. I can tell you that when we came to this country, a couple of years, it's now 5 years later, one of the first things my parents did after we moved into an apartment in New York, he said, this afternoon after I came home from school, we have to go to a store, something called a department store. You guys don't even know what that is. It's like a mall under one roof. And we get your bicycle. I was very happy with that bicycle. It's a bike that's still made to this day, but none of you know anything about a shred bike. Anybody have a shred bike? So these are things that happen because there is a war going on and because the Holocaust is beginning to take place. The war did not affect me in any serious way. There were bombings in Budapest, but not serious bombing. However, you never know where the bomb fell. We had any number of air raid issues, sometimes 1, 2, sometimes 3 times a night. Walk down 5 flights, up 5 flights, because the basement was the shelter. You saw a picture right there. I'm there going to school first day with my grandmother, my father's mother. She had some bad feet. I think had some 10 children. My father and his brothers decided what she should do is go back to the village where she had lived as a young woman, in the countryside. There would be no air raids. That was correct. But it was a good move and a bad move, and I'll get to that in a moment. So here we are in Budapest. The war is going on. In 1941, you know you're not know the dates, there was a proclamation written by the number 2 in the German government, and I'm not giving you a name, expressing Hitler's desire for the final solution of the Jewish community. The final solution of the Jewish community. Nothing happens to that proclamation until 1942, when there's a conference called in Berlin. It's known as the Wannsee Conference, because it's in a building called the Wannsee Building. The building is still there. It became a museum. The building has no significance except what took place there. What took place there is something you may or may not know. A man is appointed to run all of the trains, to take all of the people to various concentration camps. The man's name is Adolf Eichmann, an officer in Nazi army. He does a very, very good job. He clears out France and Belgium and Holland or whatever. He does not get to Hungary until very late, because as I said earlier, Hungary is an ally, so it has certain privileges. He doesn't come to Hungary until 1944. Now you guys may know that the war ends in 1945. Let me tell you briefly what happened to me at that time, and then I'll stop and I'll be glad to have some questions. Eichmann arrives in Budapest, and 2 men from a rescue committee kind of self-developed approach him. Now please understand that to approach Eichmann in those days in his headquarters building in Budapest would be the same as if you were to go to Rome tomorrow and say, I want to see the Pope now. It was not easy. But they talked their way into it. And they came up with a proposition to save some people. If Eichmann releases 1 million Jewish people from the concentration camp, it's 1944, they will supply him with 10,000 trucks laden with military material. And there was a problem with this proposition. If he wanted to release the Jews, and I'm not sure he did, there were no more million in camps, not that big. As far as 10,000 trucks, all of you came here by some kind of vehicle, right? You know what a hubcap is? But I didn't have a hubcap. They had nothing. It was a total bluff. And what happens in negotiations, that out of 10,000 trucks and 1 million people, it became an arrangement whereby 1,700 people were to be exchanged by Eichmann for a great deal of money, which was carried in suitcases, collected from all over the world. Eichmann gave the people 35 cars, freight cars, to be taken to a neutral port, to be taken out of Europe. Hitler said he wants all Jews out of Germany, he got that. Hitler said he wants all Jews out of Europe, he didn't quite get that. He wanted all Jews out of the world, that he did not achieve. By quirk of whatever, my mother, and uncle, and I were part of the 1,700. We went by train, wanting to go to some port to get on a ship. We wound up in a place which nobody had ever heard of before, called Bergen-Belsen. Now, I'm not sure any of you have heard of the concentration camp called Bergen-Belsen in Germany, but you would know the most famous victim of the Holocaust, who died in Bergen-Belsen. Would you take a guess? A girl, she wrote a diary. Anne Frank. Anne Frank and I were in Bergen-Belsen at the same time. Not that I knew her, we were in different parts of the camp. But Anne Frank died in Bergen-Belsen just weeks before the camp was liberated in 1945 by the British Army. I'm in Bergen-Belsen, negotiations continue, and eventually after 6 months in Bergen-Belsen, the group I was with is taken out of there into Switzerland. At which point my war and my Holocaust ends. Let me leave you with a final thought. The war ends on May the 8th, 1945. May the 8th is also the birthday of the President of the United States, who was president at that time. And I doubt if any of you know, Harry Truman was president. It is also the day in which the first American Pope was appointed, May the 8th. And most importantly, May the 8th is my birthday. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Manny. So as a reminder, we are happy to take as many questions as we can. We have quite a bit of time for engagement. So please write questions that you have for Manny on your note cards and pass them towards the aisles. We'll have staff that will come by and pick them up. But while we're waiting for these questions to come in, Manny, I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit more about your day-to-day life in Bergen-Belsen. You mentioned you were there at the same time as Anne Frank, but in different parts of Bergen-Belsen. Why were you in different parts, and what was that day-to-day life like?
Well, we were in different parts because depending where you came from, you were in different parts of the camp. She came from, at one point from Holland, I think Hungary. So we were not the same set of barracks. I just know she was there. I found that out after the war happens. In Bergen-Belsen, it's a concentration camp, guys. This is not a killing camp. Lots of people died from malnutrition, from disease, and from starvation. But it's not a killing camp like Auschwitz, a name that you may have heard about in some other parts. There were two things that occupied most of our day. One, I'm not going to ask you to guess, but one was again a census. Every day, we're told that at the dawn, when the sun came up, we have to be outside so we could be counted. Nobody ran away, but we had to be counted. It was part of the Nazi way of abusing us. We'd be there from 4 or 5 in the morning until 10, 11 o'clock, standing outside. Until a new lieutenant came and had the duty and said, this is absurd. I will be here at 8 o'clock to count everybody. I don't care if you get here at 7:45, but at 8 o'clock be here, which was very, very helpful. And it probably saved many of our lives. The other thing that we were occupied with all the time, not I, the adults, was food. we would get some kind of hot brown liquid brought into the camp and some bread every morning. In the afternoon, we'd get some hot brown liquid with stuff floating in it. Maybe a carrot, maybe a potato, maybe horse meat for a light. But the point is, what the people were able to do with this food is to fish out the stuff, mix it with other things, and obviously it must have done very well, because nobody died in camp. So the most important activities in camp were, one, the census, which was the hours, two, the food, three, believe it or not, within days, if not weeks of our being there, business opened up. You might say, what is he talking about? Boys and girls, the will to live can overcome many, many obstacles. People have various items with them. Somehow a man who will fix shoes, called a cobbler, had his tools with him. He would fix your shoes for 2 cigarettes. The 2 cigarettes would buy you a pound, a piece of butter. A piece of butter would trade to get you a slice of bread. This kind of business happened. People were able to find metal for which they made jewelry. I'm not saying it's fancy jewelry, but bracelets, earrings, rings, necklaces, and they traded it. Because people wanted to establish as much of normalcy, quote unquote, as they possibly could, in order to be able to survive, in a sense, in order to be able to get up in the morning and say, I'm going to work. It wasn't work. But imagine what it would be like if your folks did not have some place to go anymore. They'd stay home and pop you all day. That's better than this. Carrie, go ahead.
Thank you, Manny. A number of our audience members are wondering about what was the hardest part of your experience? What was the thing that has stuck with you the most?
Probably be sick. For several weeks I had some kind of pneumonia. Don't know now. We had 35 doctors in this group of 1,700, but they had no equipment. They had no drugs, and in those days, the only thing that would help with pneumonia is the various kind of penicillins. We didn't have any of that. So they said, all that we can do is make him comfortable and hope he survives. If he does, he'll live. If he doesn't, he'll die. And the way they made me comfortable is something that might be known in Pocahontas, because it's kind of a treatment that is kind of from the country, not from the big city. Somebody found some burlap material. Somebody else found some mustard seeds. You mash up the mustard seed, you soak the burlap into it, you put it across your chest. It gives you the feeling, you know what Bengay is, or methylated vapor rubber. Any of these things are menthol, and they give you some water. So it makes you feel better. Doesn't cure pneumonia, but if your body cures the pneumonia, at least it makes you more comfortable as you're getting along. I was sick for the better part of 3 weeks, maybe a little longer. And my mother's concern was that the guards would take me out of the camp to their dispensary, their hospital in the barracks. And she was concerned if they take me there, I may never come back. They didn't. I wasn't there, and I'm still here.
Thank you for that, Manny. Another participant is wondering, how did you go back to living normally after the Holocaust?
Well, it came in stages. After the Holocaust, I was in Switzerland. I was in a children's home. When we came out of Bergen-Belsen, we were taken to a city in Switzerland, which you don't know anything about, but we were in a very lovely, I'd been in a luxury hotel that the Red Cross was running, and they fed us some potatoes to beef us up a little bit. Now, we were not skeletons, but we all had lost some weight. And from there, they had to divide up the group because others were coming in. And somehow I was sent to a boarding school of sorts in the German part of Switzerland, and rather peculiarly, somebody had to come with us. There were 20 of us, ages 6 to 14. And somebody had come along because the only language we spoke was Hungarian. And the people in this school all spoke French or German, and so did the kids. So somebody had come along to be a caretaker, translator, teacher, God knows what else. They found out that my mother had been an elementary school teacher before she was married. So they said, fine, Ella Mandel is going to go with a group to be their caretaker. Well now, when you are the son of the caretaker, it could be the best of lives or the worst. If anything went wrong, I was blamed. I got beat up several times. If anything went right, I didn't get credit. But I was there for about 8 months, and then we proceeded from there to what was then Palestine. We were there for 4 years, and we came to New York City.
Thank you, Manny. On a related question, one of the participants is wondering about your father and when you were reunited with your father, and somewhat related to that, did you have any other family that also survived the Holocaust? What happened to your extended family?
The two aunts in the house of one, and the one who called the phone during the pogrom in the city, they survived. My cousin, the daughter of one of the aunts, died in Auschwitz. My grandparents died in Auschwitz. I don't know exactly how many, but probably 15 or 20 members of my family, cousins, uncles, and aunts, died in concentration camps, in death camps. Obviously, my mother and my father did not. My father survived labor camp and joined us in 1946. When I had not seen it at all for 2 years. Prior to that, I hardly saw him for 2 years. So with ages like 7 and 10 or so, I hardly saw him. That's a very difficult time in which to miss your father. We had to kind of learn how to speak to each other and how to treat each other because we didn't know each other very particularly well. So he survived, my mother survived, we lived in Palestine, in Israel for 4 years in total, and we came to New York.
Thank you. As a follow-up to that, a participant is wondering, when did you move to America? And what, you mentioned you moved to New York. What was that adjustment like?
I came in 1949, I was 13 years old. I had lived in big cities all my life. So there were some things in New York that were not strange. I mean, I know what a subway was, what taxis were, what telephones were, what kitchen equipment was, and so forth. But New York is a place that is an experience. If any of you have been to New York, it's unlike any other place in the world. And I had to get used to the fact that this was a city that lived 24 hours a day. You could do anything you wanted at any hour of the day and night. It was an adjustment. I remember for the first time seeing Venetian blinds. I kept opening and closing and pulling them up and down. It was new to me. We had some kind of blinds like that, but not the kind that were indoors. So the adjustment to buildings, to traffic, to the availability of everything, including food and entertainment. Remember, I dragged my parents once to a movie house that showed cartoons, about 20 of them in a row. They don't do that anymore. That was new to me, but to me it was very exciting. So all the new things that you have in a place, which is a big place, much as where I had been before, but a different big place. And of course the biggest item there was the language. My knowledge of English was very limited. My parents took me to a school which is near our apartment, PS number 3. I was in 7th grade. And the principal was very bright. He said, look, the kid doesn't speak much English. We'll put him in 7th grade. If he picks up English in the next few months, we'll put him in 8th grade. If not, we'll keep him in 7th. And we'll give one more advantage. There's a study hall every day, an hour. We'll put him into the study hall for a second hour, and we'll let him not study Spanish. They were teaching Spanish already in 7th grade. They said that the kid has enough problems learning English, he doesn't have to learn a second language yet. I adjusted, I went to 8th grade, and from there I went to high school and to college and whatnot.
Thank you for sharing that, Manny. Another participant, or quite a few participants, are wondering what made you want to open up and talk about your Holocaust experiences, and is it difficult for you to talk about your experiences to other people?
I'll answer the thing in two different ways. It is not difficult because I've done it for 20 years. After 20 years, things become easy. But even 20 years ago, it was very difficult. I thought that was my family history, it was life that I lived, and we talked about it. I was not a member of a family, nor were my parents, who didn't talk about it. I have no idea whether any of you have any family or people that you know who went through the Holocaust. Some, if you do, many people used to not talk about it. Shh, quiet, don't talk about it. It's like they're concerned that if you talk about it, it might come back. I never feared that. So we've talked about it, and I've been talking about it to inform you, because it's terribly important for you guys to know. You may or may not know the following quote, and I certainly wouldn't remember, I would think, the man who made it. The man said, those of us who do not learn our history well may be doomed to repeat it. Now, I'm not saying there's going to be no Holocaust, but he said this because he was saying, if you guys don't take time and trouble to know where you came from, what your history is, your personal history, you'll have a difficult time going ahead to your future. I certainly urge you to get your history. I'm willing to bet, this may not be nice of me, but I'm willing to bet, that most of you have very little knowledge of where your grandparents were born, where they went to school, or what they did for a living. Unless they're living with you. Most of us don't take the time and trouble to, in science anyway, to learn our history. And I'm saying if you don't learn it, if you learn it, your life ahead is easier than if you don't learn it.
Thank you for that message, Manny. Another participant is asking, do you think the events of the Holocaust affect your life today? And if so, how much and how?
I really can't answer that except to say, I'm sure it has. On the other hand, based on the lack of knowledge of the Holocaust in general, maybe it hasn't. I do some work at the Holocaust Museum where Carrie is employed, and I ask people certain things, where you're from, what are you doing? The lack of knowledge, the illiteracy is overwhelming. Now you guys here will be a little less illiterate because of what you heard today. But that should be the beginning of something, not the end.
Thank you, Manny. As a follow-up, a number of participants are wondering if you experience any challenges like PTSD today, if you've been impacted in that way from your experiences. And if so, how do you handle it?
Well, I think I'm fortunate because of how old I was. I can describe what happened with great detail. I cannot tell you what it meant. As a consequence, it didn't hurt me that in a way that it would have hurt somebody who was 5 years older than I at the time. As a 5.5-year-old kid, you can describe what took place. But what was happening, and what does it mean to be shot into the Danube and floated down, I didn't understand it. As a consequence, the hurt wasn't there as it would have been had I been a little older. It's my fortune, and I'm glad for it.
Thank you for that, Manny. Another participant is wondering, are you still a practicing Jew and why? Curious about your connection to your faith. What's your connection to your faith today?
I am, I was, and I plan to remain that way. I have not decided that God should be punished because of the Holocaust. I don't have enough grace for that. I don't have enough understanding to be able to judge. I was born a Jew. I expect that when I die, which hopefully is not tomorrow, I will remain a Jew. Period.
Thank you. Another participant is wondering, were there any German soldiers that treated you kindly or who didn't want to fight during the war or the Holocaust?
Well, most of the soldiers I was connected to or saw were mostly older men who were army guards in concentration camp. I had no contact with anybody. And some were kinder than others. I mean, I remember one soldier that came in for the census every morning, came in one morning after he saw what he saw the day before, with a pair of shoes to a woman who was standing outside in the muck for several hours, whose shoes essentially had fallen apart. Unfortunately, the shoes were too small. But it was a kind thing to do. Another one, there are always people who are willing to be human. Not many, but some. The guy who inspected a bunk when I was sick of it was permitted to stay inside the bath during the census. And this guy, we called him Popeye, because he had a corncob pipe that he smoked all the time. And he was kind in that he didn't make us get out while we were sick, out of sick bed. But those are very small examples of kindness. There was mostly unkindness that was taking place, not kindness.
And that gives me an opportunity to talk about an incredible exhibition that the museum had at our museum in Washington, D.C., but there's actually an online version for you to explore. The exhibition is called Collaboration, Somewhere Neighbors, Collaboration and Complicity During the Holocaust. And it really looks at those choices that individuals made during the Holocaust and what perhaps influenced their decisions. It's an incredible virtual exhibition that really reminds us that we have agency, that we have choice, even when confronted with really difficult challenges. So I'll be sure to share that with some of with the representatives from Black River Technical College, and hopefully they can share that with your teachers so that you can explore that a little bit more. Manny, another participant is wondering if you think media or film portrays the Holocaust accurately.
Well, some do and some don't. I thought that the one that there was a television production of several chapters and whatnot called Holocaust, which was very well done. Steven Spielberg's Schindler's List is very well done. I find it to be very accurate in describing things. The film Shoah, which is 9 hours worth, is very well done. So there's also stuff that's garbage. And I would suggest to you that maybe if you can see some of the documentaries and whatnot, do so. But even more importantly, for Pete's sake, pick up a book. Pick up a book. Books tend to be a bit more accurate than films, in many cases. If you want to know anything about this train ride that I took for 9 days from Budapest to Bergen-Belsen, pick up a book by the name of The Kastner Train. Kastner's a man organizer by a Canadian writer by the name of Anna Porter. I'm saying pick up a book. It's in your libraries, I'm sure. The school system should get a hold of Shoah, or get a hold of Schindler's List, and show it. They tend to be very good descriptions of what took place, horrible as it was.
And the museum also has a list of a bibliography, if you will, of different media sources, documentaries, films, books, whether fictional or non-fictional, that are a really great starting point if you're trying to figure out which books you should lean to. So that's another resource we can share.
Let me add one other thing. None of you know the name, does anybody ever hear the name Edward R. Murrow? Yeah, but you're more than 12 years old. Ed Murrow was a major broadcaster during the war years in the 40s. Later on, he became a very important television broadcaster. And he organized a program called Person to Person. He would be in a studio, television studio, and he would connect with a well-known person in their home, and they would have a conversation, person to person. Very interesting to watch. The museum picked up the idea, calling it first person, where a journalist would interview a survivor in front of an audience. And that's been going on for 25 years, and it's coming to the same. I've done it 10 times. The reason I mention it is because any number of survivors have done that. If you're interested in histories of survivors, look up online the Holocaust Memorial Museum, first person, and then many of them on. Right, Carrie?
Correct. Absolutely. Thank you for that, Manny. Another question that came in is, did your experiences during the Holocaust change your view of the world?
In one sense, I could say yes. I don't know how, but we should have. Another way I can say no, because that which is miserable is still miserable. We have not yet learned. We have learned not to have a Holocaust, but we have not yet learned how to stop killing people, which we do a great deal.
Thanks, Manny. A number of participants are asking about your thoughts and feelings when you were taken out of Bergen-Belsen and finally sent to Switzerland. What was that experience like for you, finally leaving?
Well, I'm 8 years old. Again, my understanding, one is not particularly well defined, and second, I didn't know too much. Much of what I've learned, and which I've told you, I've learned afterwards, when I connected my memories to other kinds of history I've heard from my family. So to me, the major issue was that we were no longer behind barbed wire. You've never lived behind barbed wire. If you did, you'd know what it's like to be there. Now, nobody got hurt with the barbed wire because we've got brains not to try to attempt it, not to try to climb it. But knowing that you have the freedom to go wherever you wish and do whatever you like, within reason, was a freeing experience.
Thank you, Manny. Another participant is wondering if at what moment were you most scared for your life or the life of a loved one? At what moment were you most scared for your life or the life of a loved one?
I told you earlier that there was a war going on, and Hungary was bombed, Budapest was bombed, buildings around where I lived. My building didn't get any bombs. It was not a severe bombing, but the Russians were coming from one side and the American allies from the other side because Hungary was an enemy to the West. Some of the scariest experiences I had was when bombs were dropped near my house, near my building, and I was in the basement in the shelter, and there were kids who lived in the buildings around me, and I didn't know if I got up in the morning and went to school, they couldn't come with me because they were bombed out and died. I was very scared of the bombing that took place, which is not Holocaust, but it certainly is scary.
Thank you for sharing that. Another participant is wondering about your family, Manny. They're wondering if you and your parents had a great relationship together, and are wondering if you have any children, and if you talk to them about your experiences.
My family and I had, it's a small family, my mother, my father, and I. Actually, this is a sidelight, but I am reasonably certain that it was the Holocaust or the war that prevented me from possibly having any siblings. I was born in 1936, which means that in a few months I'm going to be 90 years old, if I make it. If you think about your siblings, and many of you have some, I would expect that they are 1, 2, 3, 4 years younger or older than you, right? Not typically 20 years. Well, by the time 1939, 1940 came about, when I was 3 or 4 years old, my parents, I'm sure, came to the conclusion that this is not a place to bring a child in. And they didn't. To the point that my mother, for example, comes from a family of 6 children, 3 men, 3 women. In the aggregate, these 6 families had how many children, do you think? Take a guess. 6 families, and how many children? 5. I have an uncle who had 2 kids, another uncle who had 1. I was 1 and my aunt had 1. So that other people also thought that by this time is not the time to bring children into the world. So I asked my family. I can tell you about the intimate family, the nuclear family, which was only my mother and my father and I.
Thank you, Manny. I'm cognizant of the time, but there's still a couple questions that I wanted to get to, and one of which is, you touched on this a little bit, Manny, but as we're nearing the end of our program, I'm wondering if you can address the question, why do you think it's important to remember the Holocaust?
I kind of answered that question before, but let me repeat it because it's important enough. Folks, the Holocaust is a piece of history in the 20th century which is unlike any other. There were other issues that were just that difficult. Some people thought that October the 7th was one of those. Some people thought that the Inquisition, hundreds of years ago, was something like that. But we don't have to worry about that. The Holocaust is almost, I know it's not, in your lifetime. It's certainly in the area in which you live. It's important to know about it for 2 reasons at least. One, it's important to know what man can do to man, and women to women, of course. What man can do to man, and how terrible that can be. In any which way you can take steps to avoid it, you should. Secondly, it's important because you would be enriched as individuals if you knew the history of this world. And let me stop there.
On a somewhat related note, as a follow-up, we have an audience here full of young people, and one participant is wondering, what is the best advice that you can give to the younger generations, especially in this current climate?
Don't be quiet. Be inquisitive. Look up stuff. Know what's in the news. Know what's happening, whatever, television, newspaper, whatever you have available to you here and in this community. But be aware, be alive.
Thank you. Manny, before we officially close our program, is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience that we haven't touched upon today?
I don't think so, except to say thank you for coming and for being a very lovely audience. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.